let's talk about OpenAPI. More specifically, how can we generate an OpenAPI spec from our Laravel API? Laravel is a web framework for PHP, built by this guy, Taylor Otwell. You might recognise him more like this, with his Lamborghini. So the question is, how can we take our Laravel application and generate an OpenAPI spec from it? The answer is with this package, Scribe. To get started, all we need to do is install a composer package. We can write composer require dev knuckles wtf/scribe. This will install all the required dependencies so that you can generate your OpenAPI spec. Then what we want to do is publish the configuration by using the command php artisan vendor publish, passing through the tag of scribe-config. This will publish the config file for us inside config/scribe. Let's focus on this part of the configuration. You can see we've got root configuration where we're looking to match, include or exclude certain parts. If we have a look at the prefixes, we are currently matching all prefixes under API/wildcard. Now, I'm building an API only application, so I can actually remove that API/ and I'll be able to discover all routes that I've registered in my application. At this stage, I recommend generating your OpenAPI spec just to make sure that you're discovering all of the routes that you expect to. To do that, run the following artisan command, php artisan scribe generate. This will generate the OpenAPI specification inside your application's storage folder. Now, let's walk through how we can add annotations to our code so that Scribe knows more about how to generate our specification. What we have here is a relatively standard index controller. We're getting all projects and we're returning that within a JSON response. The first annotation I'm adding here is called Endpoint, and what that will do is it will tell Scribe that the action on this controller is for listing projects, and then we can pass through more of a description. So for example, list all projects. You can go into a lot more detail here, and you can add HTML elements into here as well. Next, we're going to add the group attribute, and what this allows us to do is to group and subgroup collections of endpoints or requests into logical areas for our specification and documentation. Here we are creating a projects group, and the description for this is endpoints for managing projects. Much like endpoint, you can add HTML into here if you need it. Another important attribute is authenticated. This allows us to mark certain endpoints where authentication is required. We can then add attributes such as header, where we're defining custom headers that this endpoint will include. Or we could just tell it that it accepts application JSON, or that the content type is application JSON. Now, when we're returning a response in Laravel, we don't just want to return that eloquent model. We want to obfuscate our database schema a little bit and transform the data to something a little bit more consistent. Here we're going to use a project resource passing through a collection. This means that Scribe will detect that and generate our OpenAPI specification based on how we're transforming our data. To help Scribe out here, we can add another attribute called response from API resource. We want to pass through the resource, the model, tell it if it's a collection or not, and pass through any options such as paginate and how many items should be on each page. Now, let's have a look at how we might store data. Here we have a store controller, which accepts a store request, which is one of Laravel's form requests. Within here, we want to dispatch a new command to create this project asynchronously. We're passing through the payload by creating a DTO from the request. Finally, we return a JSON response with a message and the status code of HTTP accepted, alerting any developers using our API that we've accepted this request and that they can carry on. Just like last time, we want to tell Scribe that this endpoint is for creating a project. And again, we will pass through that description saying create a new project. As this endpoint focuses around the project management of the API, we can add that to the same group as before by passing in the group attribute for projects, passing through the description of endpoints for managing projects. And again, we can add that authenticated attribute, telling the OpenAPI specification that you must be authenticated to create a new project. And just like that, you've taken your Laravel application using an open source package, you've generated your OpenAPI specification that you can use on Speakeasy to generate your own SDKs in many different languages.